and thank you for tuning in. You know, generally when I have on my muumuu and my little shell earrings, that means we're going to go to the island of Hawaii. Not today. We're going to go to a peninsula. A peninsula in the Philippines called Bataan. The Bataan Death March. Now come on, how many times do you get to use the word death and march in one sentence? It can only conjure up the worst, and that is exactly what began April 9th, 1942. You know, people often forget that December 7th, 1941, when we were being attacked in Pearl Harbor, soon afterwards, which because of the international timeline, it was December 8th of 1941, the Philippines were attacked as well. So while bombs were raining down over here, they were raining down over here in the Philippines. Our men, next to the Filipino troops, fought courageously for months, almost 4 months, trying to hold this one bastion over on the peninsula. MacArthur had already left. Corregidor was going to fall next. In fact, when they surrendered to the Japanese, it was the largest surrender of American troops since the Civil War. Imagine that. Yes. Over 80,000 POWs surrendered that day to the Japanese, and only 54,000 of them would make it on the Bataan Death March to their destination. So the peninsula is down here, and they had to get them up to Camp O'Donnell for their internment up here, over 60 miles. So what do? You have them march, but you certainly do not have food or medicine or even the desire to see them as POWs on this journey. And that's precisely what our men endured. Over 6 days to get there in the grueling heat. One account said, oh, they gave us about the equivalent of a little ball of rice at the end of 2 days. If you fell, they were wondering why weren't the Japanese doing anything with these men who have fallen. They said they didn't have to wait long. There was a death squad coming behind them, and anyone who had fallen was simply shot and left right there for the rest of those coming up behind to see. There was what they called the Oriental sun treatment, which they exposed them in the blazing sun all day long next to a cool water, and if you asked, you know, cool creek or something, and if you asked for water, you were shot. There was a beheadings. One man recounts that because they found when they had to empty, the prisoners had to empty their pockets, and if they found anything that looked like it was Japanese or gotten from a Japanese soldier, the first man was just shoved to the ground and beheaded right there in front of everyone. They were beaten, they were run over by trucks. It was an incredible atrocity against humanity, and it's specifically against our soldiers. So they make it up part of the way to San Fernando Railway there, and then they're crammed into these World War I tin cans of trains. No ventilation. Literally, they said they were stacked like sardines, and you couldn't sit, you couldn't do anything, and men died standing in the heat. They were left in it all day and then finally transported up, and then they had to get out and hike again for another about 12.5 miles after that. But getting to the camp was only the first leg of the horror, because then they were crammed in again, overpopulated, malaria and dysentery spread like wildfire, and the numbers are staggering of the death tolls per day. The height of it, there was 474 Filipinos who died in one day and 77 Americans, all in one day, dying in these camps. Now one man, Dyes was his name, William Dyes, escaped and made it to Australia and then was brought to America. But his story, the story of the Bataan Death March, was kept very, very quiet and silent. It was political. President Roosevelt did not want that story out. He wanted to wait until the time was absolutely right. And that's precisely what he did. He held it top secret. He didn't want the focus to go from the European theater. And then when it looked like they had in 44, when they had the European theater pretty well wrapped up, they released the story. Life magazine did a big spread on it, and of course the focus shifted to the Pacific theater, and the anger was put over there, and they were just, America was ready to go after and wipe out and win against now the Japanese. You know, war is so ugly. And the brutality of this Bataan Death March in the Pacific really set the stage for how our prisoners in Japan were going to be treated. Prisoners of the Imperial Japanese forces. So on April 9th, please remember the Bataan Death March and those who didn't give up hope. I do love the story, and I do have it in my blog, but the story of the man who was so courageous by putting sand in his cuffs and then dribbling it into the machines that the Japanese had him working on. You know, the Japanese would use our soldiers, of course, as slave laborers. So that's what he was doing, and that was his little bit to get back at the Japanese, because he knew that the sand would eventually clog the mechanisms of the machine and that it would falter. So it's great hope that they taught us, a great courage, great valor, and those who survived were absolutely amazing. So there are places across the United States and in the Philippines where there are memorials, and there is generally a wreath-laying ceremony that it goes on or around April 9th, the day that they surrendered, April 9th, 1942, when they surrendered on the low banks of the peninsula of Bataan and then marched the 60 miles in 6 days to Camp O'Donnell. Remember to teach these things so people don't think war is worthwhile, because it's not. No one wins. And the Bataan Death March is a prime example of the brutality and the inhumanity that war brings out in people. So thank you for joining me. I wish it were a more pleasant topic, but it's not. And hopefully the next time I'm in my little muumuu here with my little shell earrings on, I'll be talking about something more pleasant. But war is never pleasant to talk about. So as I always say, please teach peace. Thank you for joining me, and do come back. Thank you. Denise Frasino, signing off. Bye.